I'm going to attempt this, and if I need backup, I forgot my twin back here, my cousin Patrick. He's going to come up and finish it for me. June 15th, 1941 through July 23rd, 2016. That little dash between those dates, we've all heard, signifies one's time on earth. It's hard to imagine that 75 years on earth can be summed up in that little dash. I'm going to attempt to summarize Big Jim. I'm going to attempt to summarize his dash here now. James Burnett Keown, or Big Jim as most called him, was born in the Grove community on Opera House Road in their farm home. His daddy was M.M. Keown, who was a well-renowned builder in the Star Island community. His mother was Eunice Perrin Keown, who was a homemaker, a farm wife, and mother to 10 perfect children. 10. And Big Jim was sixth born out of those 10, out of their matrimony. Both of his parents were known as saints of their church, and they practiced what they believed. Now, could you imagine 10 children being born to a family today? It just does not happen anymore. We got Uncle Herman, who was the oldest, followed by Talmadge, followed by Mildred, followed by Dot, followed by Buddy, followed by Big Jim, followed by Barbara, followed by Sue, followed by Linda, and the baby boy, Uncle Frank. Where's he at? The baby boy. I'd say it's safe to say they were a tight-knit family. The Keown family grew cotton, corn, livestock, poultry, and always had a huge garden. And I'd say, judging on the size of my daddy, he probably had at least 2 acres of corn for himself to eat, and about 1 acre of cotton should make a pair of overalls for him. Daddy's oldest brothers were already moved out and in the military when he was old enough to work around the farm. He and Buddy tell the story of M.M. coming into their room in the morning and giving them each a list of chores to do before he got home from his building job. I asked Uncle Buddy this week after Dad had passed, had they ever had any discipline issues from M.M., and he replied, not much. All he had to do was give you the eye. They knew their chores had better be done when he got home or else. Big Jim was the same on my brother, and he had a way to discipline us with a look. But I think his favorite discipline was a fan belt off a Ford 8-inch tractor. He really loved those fan belts, didn't he, too? Or whatever he could find the quickest. But there was always a broke one laying around somewhere. When they were kids and they finished up their work, Daddy liked to spend time on the Savannah River, which is now considered part of Lake Russell. Uncle Buddy told me this week that many times they was climbing up and down Smith McGee Bridge, which is the old bridge that's right here connecting us to Georgia, and it's broken in two now. And when he said that, I was, how in the world they make it this long to begin with? Climbing up and down that thing, one side to the other, catwalking. Uncle Buddy told me the story of them, and I've heard Daddy say pumping up old tractor inner tubes, and putting an inner tube in at Savannah River and floating down from Smith McGee Ferry all the way down to Mountain View, and then when they get there, they say, wait a minute, we got a long walk home. They'd walk back home, and I just couldn't help. It was such a simpler time back then, and they entertained themselves, because where they grew up was in the middle of nowhere, if y'all know where the Opera House is. And I just thinking, imagine if they had an iPhone, all the Pokemon they could catch. Daddy used to love to tell the story of him and Buddy and their friend Sam Dill Pickle Brown. They'd get those red clay hills over on 181. They'd throw a pocketbook tied to a string way down them hills next to the highway, and they'd hide up in the woods, and they'd watch these cars come by, and these cars, of course, would see that pocketbook, and they'd never fail. They'd get somebody. They'd stop, and them boys would pull that pocketbook back up in the woods and just laugh and giggle and make a mess. Buddy was telling me this. I hadn't heard Daddy ever say this one, but one time, the last time they did the pocketbook trick was somebody pulled a gun out on them, started firing either at them or up in the air. And Daddy said, and Buddy was saying, everybody took off running, and Buddy stopped and looked around, and Big Jim was gone. Said Big Jim had already run back to the house, and I remember Daddy saying a lot of times. He said, I'm bad to cut and shoot when I get in a fight. Now, what do you mean, cut to the nearest way home and shoot under the bed? And that statement, Daddy was a gentleman, and not necessarily a gentleman, but just a big gentleman. And thank God for him raising my brother and I in the same fashion, and my sister, but gentlewoman would be correct in that statement. So, as my brother and sister and I grew up, we became accustomed to hearing nicknames because my daddy had one for almost everyone who crossed his path. I'm going to call a few of them out, and if you're in the audience, you might want to raise your hand here. And I tried to do a survey this week, and I've heard so many funny things in just over the years. Jaybird. Heard one called Mule Biscuit. Who in the world's called Mule Biscuit? They out there. Hard Rock. Spud. Arv. Arv was my favorite one. He always called Uncle Buddy Arv. Frotchy. New Gene. Stick. Doodah. For whatever reason, he had a bunch of names for me, but he always called me Thomas. Still haven't figured that one out. Got Patch. One of his old friends was named Gene. He called him Genius Gene. Yardbird. May Wee. He called Aunt Dottie second mama. Carly. Kelly Bell. Judy Lynn, the big fat hen. He always called his mama, when I was older, Nanny Puddin'. Dude Wayne. He called Doodlebug Boo Boo. La, and he called Wiley Walters and WP and Walt Thomas and all kind of other names, whatever started with a W, I believe. Palsy Wowsy, Steffi Joanne, Katie Doodle Dandy, Flip, T-Bone, Sweet Reek, Silly Veen, Lou, Hump, Wormy, Inky. Out of all these, his favorite was his beloved Lou Bird. He must have got his whipping skills from Nanny Puddin'. As kids, when they misbehaved, Nanny would send them to get their own hickory switch, and I've heard him tell this 100 times. Uncle Buddy confirmed the other day. He said Daddy would always come back with the smallest hickory he could find, and she'd send him back to get another one that was fitting to get across his behind. Well, fast forward to the days of Darla, Stephen, and I. He didn't give Darla too many spankings, I don't think, because she was always too sweet. But I think me and Stephen, on the other hand, kept a bruised up hiney from 4 to 14. But it worked on all of us, I believe. I used to think Daddy looked like he was trying to crank a chainsaw when he'd pull that big old 44-inch waist belt off, coming at you. But he always seemed to come back and tell you why he whipped you. And that always made an impact. He'd come back and he'd settle it with you, afterwards. And he always had big old tears. He wasn't very emotional, but he always come back and settle that. Make sure you knew you loved you. Uncle Buddy was telling me about him, and they would go over to Uncle George's house over in Grove, who was a bachelor, I think, for life over there, George Perrin, over in the Grove community, and they would go see him, and Uncle Buddy talked about just, in my mind, the old, what I'd call a hard scrabble farm boy life, and they was over there and went to see Uncle George, and George had a mean old rooster named Bill, and Bill met him at the gate like a guard dog, and Bill come up and flogged Daddy and cut him in the face with a spur, and Uncle Buddy said he had a scar. I don't remember seeing that scar, but Daddy's buddy said he had a scar from that old mean rooster, and Uncle George never skipped a beat and poured some feed on the ground and singled old Bill out, and one swift knock with a hickory stick and made him supper for that night. Darla got her first car in the mid-'80s, and every teenage girl dreams of having a sports car to drive during high school. Well, in the mid-'80s, the car to have was an IROC. And for y'all too young to remember, IROC's just a fancy name for a Camaro. Darla begged Daddy to buy her one. She was relentless about it. Even told him, "You work at UPS. I know you can afford one." Jimmy Brewster bought Teresa one, and he works there. Darla came home one night, and Daddy said, "I got you IROC, dude." And Darla, of course, squeals with excitement. "Where's it at? Where's it at?" He never moves from his big chair and points to the mountain where he had drawn a large eye on a smooth river rock. Darla's IROC can be seen right there. The eye's about faded off, but there's her IROC. We got a donkey story I got to tell. I'm trying to make it light because that's what he would want. He loved critters. Old Walters, Wiley over here, as Daddy called him, used to always tell this story. My memory, it was me, you, and Daddy out there. And Daddy loved horses, mules, and donkeys, and I guess he liked hard-headed people and animals. He got a new jack, donkey jack, and he wanted a little cart to pull behind him so he could ride and look like something fancy. Daddy loved auctions, and when I was young, we went to Westminster Horse Auction almost every Saturday night for about 5 years in a row, and we'd come back with something every time. Usually junk, or usually a mangy horse, or a crazy horse, or a mule, or something. Well, he finally found a little two-wheel pony cart, a little old thing with little bicycle rims and tires on it. Bought it cheap. He hooked that jack up that thing, and was out the front yard. And he, of course, you got to remember, Daddy then was a little bit bigger than he was now. He's probably 300 pounds or more. And that Jack didn't want nothing to do with that man sitting on the back of that cart. Daddy gave him the old gentle stroke with the whip. That Jack took off. Cart twisted over like this. Daddy lands on his back wearing overall. Of course, I'm worried about him. He looked like he's out of breath. Jack takes off, and I believe it was intentional that he ran through every tree on that property. I believe that Jack knew, "I'm going to pay you back." You understand? And we finally found that cart, Wiley. You remember that? It was stuck between two trees, and he had run through those two trees strategically enough to get that harness and everything off. And the next time we saw him, he was up grazing in the pasture looking at us like, "You dummies, tried to tell you." While in the meantime, Daddy's still trying to catch his breath in the front yard. Having been raised in the country, we all learned to drive at an early age, and Stephen and I learned how to drive a straight drive on a tractor first. Daddy would let us drive on a little road sometime, and when we got a little better, he'd let us drive across the big road, like Highway 28 over there. And I just remember, if y'all know where Miss Hall's fishing pond is, it's got that hairpin turn. And Daddy was the world's best backseat driver. He needed a trophy. And he wouldn't take his eyes off the road, even as a passenger or any road sign. And I guess UPS safety taught him all that. Even up until last week when I took him to the VA in Greenville to get his new wheelchair, he told me the whole time, "Watch the road, boy. You know what the speed limit is, right? Thompson, there's a truck up there. Watch them brake lights." I said, "Daddy, I got it. I got it, Pop. Got it." Well, I was about 14, and he let me drive Mama's big old Caprice Classic. Of course, I wasn't old enough to have my driver's license yet, and Uncle Frankie lived about 3 miles through the country, and we was driving over to his house. So Daddy cheated and let somebody with no license drive over there. He did that continuously the whole time. I mean, before I even backed out the driveway, there were 7 reprimands. You know, how I put it in reverse and my foot was wrong and all this. And I got about a mile and a half over toward Miss Hall's big hairpin turn, and, "Oh, you see that curve, don't you?" I said, I just hit the brakes, put it in park, and I got out reversed. I went walking home. He never missed a beat. He got out, got the driver's seat, put it in drive. He went off the other way. He went on to his business. He went over to Uncle Frankie's, and of course, it was a 30-minute walk. He drove right past me. I'm still walking home. I was thinking, man, you don't have any sympathy on me. And I guess he was just trying to get me to exercise my belly off. That happened 2 times, and I don't know if Mama remembers the second time. I was driving a truck. She was sitting in the middle, and he was doing that. And I'd had enough. You can't argue with him. I just put it in park, and Daddy got out, got in the truck, and took off the other way. And Mama must have cried and begged him to come back and get me because they turned around and got me that time. So thank you, Mama. I had never told you thank you. Stephen was the mechanic of the family, or is the mechanic of the family. He's working on tractors and fixing them when he was 5 years old. And Stephen has a natural knack for fixing anything with an engine. He learned most of his mechanical knowledge from Daddy. Those two were a lot alike, so much that when Stephen got to be about 16, they couldn't hardly work in the shop. Not together. I mean, it was an argument every time. But they worked hand in hand for, Stephen turned 5 years old, about 16, 17, and he went on his own doing his own stuff. Well, about 2 years ago, Daddy wanted me and Stephen to hook up a bush hog for him, and Daddy was on the tractor barking orders, of course, at Stephen and myself, which was the normal for him. And to make it even worse, our old buddy Pork Chop was there, agging Daddy on. And everything Daddy would say, Pork Chop would re-emphasize. Yeah, you don't know how to, what do you mean? Back up, no, do this. Just to rile me and Stephen up. Well, Daddy popped the clutch. I don't know if his leg was weak or the tractor was just wore out. Popped the clutch and the like to have chopped my hand off. Because I'm back there bent over trying to hook the PTO, and he popped the clutch in reverse and it like to got me. That's probably the first time I said a bad word in front of my daddy. And of course he didn't. He just kind of shrugged it off, and Stephen and Pork Chop looked like they saw a ghost because I done got aggravated and plumb mad and said a curse word. And I went on to ask both of them, did they write the book on how to properly hook up a rusty bush hog? If they didn't, leave. I didn't know if y'all knew Daddy knew sign language or not. He was an expert according to Stephen. When Stephen was bush hogging, he was about 7 or 8 years old. He ran into a nest of hornets, and they were swarmed around him. When Stephen was driving and the hornets were behind him, he didn't know they were right there. Stephen said he looked over, 100, 200 yards. Daddy's doing all this stuff. Looks like an airplane pilot control ground crew trying to do all this mess. And Stephen turned around. He thought he was wanting him to come back home. And he turned around and drove right back through the hornets. Stephen said he was stung about 30 times and still hadn't figured out what Daddy was trying to tell him. And Daddy was a professional at baking special cookies. Mama used to pack his lunch every day for work. And when Daddy would put it in the fridge at work, somebody kept stealing it. This went on for a few weeks, and he done had enough of it. He asked Mama if she would bake him some special cookies with a special ingredient called X-Lax. He was going to get that person and find out who it was stealing his lunch. Daddy said it took about 30 minutes because Daddy was a truck driver, and he drove all night to Atlanta. He would drive to Atlanta and turn around, come back, and sometimes to Greensboro and, a few places in between. But Daddy said it took him about 30 minutes to figure out who the culprit was because the unknown truck driver, what was a 2-hour trip to Atlanta, took about 4 hours. Mama didn't want me to tell that, but because she's so sweet, she don't want nobody to know she did something that bad. Daddy was a simple family man, a gentleman. Maybe not in the sense that was always prim and proper, but he was a gentleman. Even after the whoopings he'd give us sometime. He provided for us the only income in the home while Mama raised us. He not only provided, he went over and beyond. He made sure to pay for Darla's piano lessons, which we all benefit from now. He trained Stephen into auto and tractor mechanics, where he makes his living now. He bought my first guitar when I was 14 from Mitch, old Washburn. You can't hardly fret that thing. It hurts your fingers. And gave me the confidence to play in front of people, which also helps me in my job today because I'm speaking in front of people a good bit. He was not a superhero. He was a simple country boy who burnt firewood because central heat cost too much. He loved bluegrass music. He loved people. He loved tractors and farming. He loved his family. He loved his country and those who served in the armed forces. He loved fresh vegetables. He loved fatback. He loved grits. He loved overalls. He loved chitlins, believe it or not. And sometimes would eat them cold, which is even worse. He loved cornbread and buttermilk. He loved fish, fried, not baked. He loved PB Blaster. If y'all have ever seen that stuff in a can over there, he loved that. He'd buy it by the cases because he's always working on some junk, rusty bucket tractor. And he'd have a can of that in one hand and the air wrench in the other one. He'd be spraying the bolt all at the same time. Cases of it. I can remember. I'll never forget the smell of that stuff. He loved pickled eggs. He'd always have a big jar. Mom would get him. He loved dogs. He loved horses, mules, and donkeys. He loved oyster stew. He loved Vienna sausages. He loved peanuts in his Coke. He loved South Carolina and Georgia. Because that's where his ancestors and his heritage were from both places. He loved his family, especially Lou Bird, and she loved him. Thank you, Mama, for being by his side for 49 years. Literally by his side until the last moment he was on this earth. He may not have been a superhero, but by God, he was country as collard greens and fat bag, and that's good enough for me. Rest in peace, Pop.